Teenagers, minors.
I am 13 years old, finna be 14 in 3 months. You don't want a lot of people to find out that you live here. People will make fun of it, and it can really haunt you after a while.
My name is Michelle Franza. I'm 17 years old. It's really hard not having your own home.
When we can't afford to pay our bills, like our house bills and stuff, I'm afraid like we'll get homeless. Me and my brother will starve.
And it's like quite embarrassing to not have a house or a home to live in.
Hi, my name is Kenneth Chansey. I'm an 11th grader, junior at Helen Bernstein High School. When I become a doctor, I just want to donate half my check to everyone out here to get them off the streets, because I don't believe anyone belongs on the streets.
Teenagers, minors. Teens or minors, these children ages 12 to 24, are the future of our nation, are currently forced to study their lessons in the back of cars, crammed tightly into shelters, strong smell of body, or enduring the biting cold and the dangers, temptations, and vices lurking on the streets. Why is that? If these were your children, your siblings, or your neighbors, would you be able to ignore it? Or would your compassion still be there when you see these unfortunate children? Today, we are going to dive deep into one of the most heartbreaking issues in the United States: the homelessness of teens and young adults in our so-called Great America. A wealthy superpower that prides itself on human rights, protective laws, and social welfare systems. But look closely. What are they doing to the very future seeds of their own country?
Why am I stuck here like this? Why am I homeless? Why?
San Jose, California stands at the top in the rate of youth homelessness, with approximately 85 homeless young people per 100,000 residents. New York has the highest number of homeless students, while Los Angeles and Seattle are witnessing this situation increase sharply, with tens of thousands of people facing housing difficulties. These kids are not only living in shelters, but are also forced to rely on friends' sofas.
Most exciting part, probably a real bed, because for almost a year I'd slept on a lumpy sectional couch. So having a real bed has been really nice.
Most of them fall into homelessness due to family conflicts, including coming out, being rejected by their families, unwanted pregnancies, or untreated psychological trauma. Stay with me, and we will decode the causes and the solutions that the government has implemented, and whether they have resolved even a part of this crisis, or whether the future of America will have to bear the serious consequences if we do not change course right now.
My parents fought all the time. That was rough.
Yeah, you heard that, right? 4.2 million. And out of those, about 700,000 minors are completely on their own. No guardian, no support. Just trying to survive.
My grandmom knows, but she kicks me out of the house. I don't really have parents.
In the 2023 to 2024 school year, more than 1.5 million students were homeless. During the 2023 to 2024 school year, over 1.5 million students became homeless. And in New York City, October 2025, 154,000 public school students, nearly 1/7 of the total student population, experienced homelessness during the 2024 to 2025 school year, a form of invisible homelessness. And that number, it's not slowing down, it's rising fast. You got it. This is happening right now.
But, because I'm a professional as well and working, and people like that shouldn't be in this kind of situation, but, this is where I found myself. And I did worry a bit, thinking, if people find out that I'm homeless, maybe they'll just not take me as seriously. Since being in this situation and exposed to it all, it's quite scary.
Now, don't think this is just some group of kids on the streets. No, these kids are moving, shifting between cars, motels, overcrowded apartments, or crashing on couches. They're not visible in the usual places, and that's the scary part. This isn't just big, it's unstable, hard to track, and most people have no idea how bad it's gotten. You know what I mean? And what happens if the next economic shock hits? You think things are tough now. According to the 2024 Chud Point in Time, count 205,878 young people under 25 were homeless on a single night. 29% more than last year. Yeah, and among them 148,238 were under 18, a 33% jump. And it doesn't stop there. Over 1.5 million students are homeless in 2023 to 2024, and it's only going to keep climbing. What do you think? And it's not just any group of kids. Some kids are hit harder. Black, Latino, Native American, LGBTQ+ youth, and those aging out of foster care, right? They're facing stacked odds. It's like the game's rigged from the start. But here's the thing, these numbers aren't just stats. These are real lives. These kids are fighting for their next meal, their next place to sleep, and they're doing it on America's streets. In June 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that cities have the right to enforce bans on sleeping or camping outdoors, even when there is insufficient space in shelters. This decision could have serious consequences for homeless youth, as they may be criminalized instead of receiving support. Rather than being placed in assistance programs, they could face fines or arrest leading to criminal records that hinder their ability to secure jobs and rent housing in the future. And while Congress is sitting there debating how to fix it on the ground, these kids are being swept from the streets like trash. Yeah, swept. By the police, and what do they get in return? Nothing. We've reached a tipping point where it's cheaper to lock these teens up for sleeping in a park than it is to give them a place to live, and that's the system we're dealing with. So what's next? Where do we go from here? You tell me. Why is youth homelessness soaring right now? Well, it's not a coincidence, it's a perfect storm. Rising housing costs, stagnant wages, and a system failing to keep up. This isn't a slow trend. It's happening fast, and it's only going to get worse. Here's the thing, when kids are kicked out of their homes with no safety net, no backup, they end up on the streets. And it's not always obvious. You know, they're not just living under bridges. It's worse. They're shifting from cars to motels to overcrowded apartments to couches in friends' houses. You got it. And here's where it hits harder. When the unthinkable happens, a job loss, a sickness, or a disaster like a flood, families can't handle it. They break down. And the ones who suffer the most, the kids, they get displaced with no home and nowhere to go. They're fighting to survive, and that's the tipping point. But it doesn't end there. Let's talk about the foster care system for a second. It's supposed to help right wrong. Every year, 20,000 young adults age out of foster care at 18 with 0 transition plans. They're expected to suddenly be adults with no credit, no cosigner, no savings, and no housing. Meanwhile, the rental market demands $30 an hour just to get in the door. Does that even make sense? The system drops them straight into the grind of street survival. And guess what? It doesn't stop there. Kids from broken families, whether it's from abuse, neglect, or rejection over identity, are shoved into the streets. And let's talk numbers. 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ+, with a 120% higher chance of ending up homeless compared to their straight peers. Worse still, the foster care system is dumping kids onto the streets. 46% of them end up homeless right after aging out. No support, no skills, no way to survive. And yet politicians keep throwing around this idea of personal responsibility, like these kids are making bad choices. But here's the real story. Skyrocketing rent cuts to eviction protections, no child tax credits, and natural disasters piling on the pressure. It's not just about losing a house, it's families being crushed, safety nets being ripped apart, and kids being left to fend for themselves. So what do we do? You tell me. Because this isn't on the kids, it's on the system that's failing them, until we admit that the body count on America's streets is only going to rise. You know what I mean? Once these young survivors hit the pavement, the real body count starts piling up fast, and the damage runs deeper than any shelter can fix. But here's the first hook that forces a hard look. What if the deadliest threat isn't the next stranger with bad intentions, but the silent war raging inside their heads that turns every night into a fight for sanity? Mental health crashes hard and fast. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, and suicidal thoughts slam these kids at rates several times higher than their housed peers, with self-harm becoming a brutal daily survival tactic just to feel something real amid the non-stop grind. On top of that substance, abuse kicks in as the quick escape hatch. 30 to 50% turn to alcohol or drugs to numb the constant street battle, trading one hell for another, while their bodies pay the price in wrecked sleep, shaking hands, and crashing energy. Here's the second hook that sparks real fire. While politicians love blaming bad choices, the raw numbers scream systemic failure. Society's neglect is now costing taxpayers billions in emergency rooms, jails, and welfare systems, turning these youth into lifetime liabilities instead of tomorrow's workers. Moreover, exploitation hits like a freight train. Trafficking, survival sex deals, and sexual violence explode, especially for LGBTQ+ youth who already walk around with bigger targets on their backs. Education collapses next. Constant school switches, sky-high dropout rates, and zero stability make landing any real job almost impossible, locking them into the long-term homelessness trap with no exit ramp in sight. Physically, malnutrition and infectious diseases spread unchecked. Bodies weakened from skipped meals, endless exposure, and zero medical backup, turning basic survival into a daily war of attrition. The bottom line from the front lines: these consequences aren't just personal tragedies. They're a massive drag on society's resources, with skyrocketing costs for healthcare, justice, and safety nets. Ignore the aftermath at our own peril, because these kids' brutal survival struggles today become everyone's expensive problem tomorrow. Standard-issue shelter systems are a tactical failure, acting as nothing more than high-volume processing centers for human misery that prioritize headcounts over actual outcomes. To stop the bleed, we have to pivot toward high-efficiency, low-barrier logistics like housing first. This isn't about giving away apartments, it's an operational reset. In cities like Portland and Seattle, tiny house villages are being deployed as modular survival units, providing a secure perimeter and a stable base of operations that a 2,000-bed warehouse shelter simply cannot offer. Furthermore, the most aggressive and controversial tool in the 2026 arsenal is the Guaranteed Income Pilot. States like California and Washington are bypass-cutting the bureaucracy by injecting $1,000 to $1,200 monthly directly into the pockets of youth aging out of foster care. Critics call it a handout, but insiders know it's a high ROI prevention strike. It's a survival stipend designed to bridge the cliff where the state usually leaves these kids to starve. If a $1,000 check is all that stands between a teenager and a survival sex transaction, the problem isn't the teenager, it's the currency of our national conscience. Mechanically, this cash injection provides the liquidity needed for a security deposit or a car repair, the literal difference between a job interview and a jail cell. Ultimately, the controversy remains: are we fixing the system or just subsidizing its collapse? We've reached a point where tactical empathy is the only logical path forward. If we don't fund these modular high-velocity solutions now, we are essentially pre-funding the expansion of the prison industrial complex for the next 30 years. The math is cold. The reality is grimy. But the light at the end of the tunnel is only visible if we stop trying to fix 2026 problems with 1980s blueprints. There's a dark truth about youth homelessness that most people ignore. It's invisible. You won't find these kids sleeping under bridges or huddling in alleyways. Instead, they're living in plain sight, blending in and staying hidden in places most of us never think to look. Cars, motels, overcrowded apartments, and even couches in friends' homes. But don't be fooled, just because they're not visible doesn't mean they're not fighting to survive. You got it. What happens when kids are forced into these spaces? They're not just without a home. They're without a safety net, forced to exist in a system that offers them zero protection. They may be going to school looking normal, but their reality is a constant struggle. They don't have a safe place to rest to reset. Every day is survival. And you know what's crazy? Most people don't even know it's happening. So who's paying the price for this invisible crisis? The numbers are right in front of us. Over 1.5 million students are homeless in the 2023 to 2024 school year, but many of them don't show up on the radar. Why? Because they're hidden in plain sight. They're not counted in the typical headcount of homelessness, and because they're not visible, they slip through the cracks. That's why this issue is so damn hard to tackle. It's elusive. You know what I mean? Take a second to think about it. Most of these kids aren't asking for help. They're doing what they can to survive unnoticed. But what happens when you push kids to the edge with nowhere to turn? They live in survival mode, keeping their heads down, praying for things to get better. But what happens when there's no end in sight? It gets worse. The system is designed to fail them. What happens when survival is all these kids know? The truth is, there's no easy solution. These kids are living in a constant state of instability, jumping from one temporary space to the next, always fearing they'll be found out. They have to keep moving because if they stay still too long, the threat of being outed and forced onto the streets becomes real. And the thing is, this hidden homelessness isn't just affecting a few kids, it's affecting millions. So what's the real cost of all this? It's not just that they're invisible, it's that society doesn't even see the problem until it's too late. The system doesn't care. These kids don't have a voice, and their survival isn't anyone's priority. That's why we can't afford to keep ignoring them. The system needs to see them. Otherwise, we're just watching them fall through the cracks, and it's getting harder to ignore. Abandoning 1.5 million kids isn't a social oversight. It's a high-stakes bet that we can ignore the structural collapse of our own future workforce without consequence. Ruthlessly speaking, the American machine is currently redlining dumping its most vulnerable assets into the streets to save on short-term maintenance costs. What if the great American dream is actually just a closed-circuit survival test that only those with a pre-existing safety net are equipped to pass? Consequently, we are burning through human capital like it's disposable fuel. Strategically, every cent we save by ignoring a 19-year-old on a transit bench today will fundamentally cost us 10 times that in emergency stabilization and correctional facility overhead tomorrow. Are we actually building a superpower, or are we just subsidizing a sophisticated assembly line for the next generation of inmates? Paradoxically, we've reached a point where tactical indifference is more profitable than human preservation in the eyes of the state. This isn't a lack of resources, it's a deliberate allocation of survival. Stop looking for charity and start demanding structural integrity. If you aren't advocating for the immediate high-velocity deployment of housing and basic income, you are merely a passive observer of a national implosion. The bill is coming due, and the interest rate is our collective future. We have to pivot now, or we're just managing the decline.